Hello, and welcome to Around the Political World with John Rothman. I am your host, John Rothman. If you're a fan of the show, make sure to hit the follow button on the top right of Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you are listening at this very moment. When you hit follow, leave a review or share an episode with a friend. It helps other people discover the show, keeps us going. As I like to remind you each and every day, it expands our base. The headlines do not reflect the urgency of this moment when it comes to Ukraine. And I'm raising Ukraine because we haven't talked about it in a while, and no one is really talking about it. It's sort of receded from the front pages of newspapers. And yet there is a peace process that theoretically is about to be formed because two individuals, Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump, are suggesting that if they get together, maybe they can solve the problem. That is what Donald Trump is saying. And Marco Rubio, currently involved in what has been an aborted effort to come to some conclusion, has said very clearly that nothing will be done in Ukraine without Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin sitting down together. And if they do sit down together, where does that leave Zelensky and Ukraine? There is a fear abroad in the land that the superpowers, the United States and Russia, will simply impose some sort of settlement on Ukraine. Well, let's be clear, it won't work. It didn't work at Munich in 1938, and it's not going to work now. The reason? Ukrainians are determined to liberate their country, and the Russians are determined to continue to occupy much of Ukraine and indeed to wipe Ukrainian independence off the map. Russia would like to go back to the days of the former Soviet Union, when Ukraine was simply part of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, what we would now call euphemistically the Russian Empire of that period. To be crystal clear, it does not seem to me that going back like that is possible. There is news reported by a number of major news sources that the Russians are planning a massive attack on Ukraine to solidify its situation. At the same time, we know that Donald Trump, the President of the United States, has indicated that Russia should retain sovereignty over Crimea, which Russia illegally occupied several years ago. Now, there are dramatic implications here. First of all, and let's be very clear, first of all, no solution can be imposed. Secondly, despite the fact that the Russians call Zelensky a clown, he isn't. He's the president of a sovereign nation. Number three, there is a fear abroad that if this situation is not resolved, casualties will rise and the situation will be very tense. It is important to point out that you are seeing the fact that Europe, which frankly sides with Ukraine overwhelmingly, is impotent. Why? Because there cannot be a real war with Russia. Now, what do I mean by a war? Nuclear. Nuclear. That is what Vladimir Putin threatens periodically. That if, in fact, a settlement is not reached, he could use a nuclear bomb. Of course, that would be an unmitigated disaster for the world, not to mention Russia and Ukraine. And what about Ukrainian nationalists? They are determined to resist, so that even if a peace were to be imposed by the United States and Russia, there would be resistance from Ukraine, overwhelming resistance. The peace talks going on now are not peace talks. Really, what they're talking about is some sort of ceasefire, an acceptance of the status quo. But the difference is Ukraine has limited resources, and with the United States seemingly unprepared in terms of supplying Ukraine with more weapons, that leaves it to the Europeans. Now, there was a major step forward, and that is, and I believe what I'm saying now is true, under duress, Ukraine signed an agreement for the mineral rights in Ukraine in the future. And that agreement said the United States would have the ability to exploit, and I'm using the term exploit carefully, exploit those mineral rights, which means the United States would have an investment, if you will, in helping Ukraine. So far, we have not seen that manifested in aid arriving for Ukraine. And of course, Russia has such overwhelming military power. Who knows whether that would even matter? I'm raising this because no one is talking about what's happening in Ukraine, unless you are in Europe. In Europe, Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, Poland, all are concerned about the future of their condition, because it appears that the goal of Vladimir Putin is to recreate the Russian Empire, or if you will, the old Soviet Empire. Remember, for years, when Russia was the Soviet Union, Ukraine was maintained as really part of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Putin wants some sort of arrangement of that kind, I believe, and the West so far is unwilling to go along with it. Although, the question now is, what will Donald Trump say or do? The simple fact is that he is talking about sitting down with Putin and the two of them working it out. Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, reaffirmed that position yesterday. But to be blunt with you, no imposed solution will work. And the real cause of these tensions, is Russian imperialism. Or should I say, Vladimir Putin's intent on recreating a Russian empire. This, my friends, would be a simple matter were it not now involving Europe in a major war, and if the nuclear deadlock did not exist. But to be very blunt, Ukraine remains a major issue, and the question of whether or not we will address it, and how the United States will respond to this question is still an open-ended situation. I want to conclude by saying this. Not talking about it, not addressing it, doesn't mean that Ukraine is not a serious problem. And the idea that the United States and Russia could impose a settlement is as silly, in my mind, as the Munich Agreement of 1938, when Britain, France, Italy, and Germany attempted to impose a solution to the Czech crisis. I don't see it, just don't see it. And in the meantime, it is the people of Ukraine who are suffering, and the danger of an escalating war continues, and the role of the United States remains critical. Let's remember the Republicans who once avidly supported Ukrainian independence are now relatively passive, and there is not a move in the world to try to end this conflict in an honorable fashion. That means, in my mind, the removal of Russia from Crimea. We'll see what happens. It's going to be interesting, and we'll be talking a lot about this question in the days ahead. Thanks for tuning into another episode of Around the Political World with John Rothman. I am John Rothman. Make sure to follow along and let me know your thoughts on the show by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts and sharing an episode with a friend or colleague so we can continue to grow and expand, which is, of course, our goal. You can interact with me on LinkedIn. You can send me emails. There's no question that I want to hear what you are thinking. So please do be in touch. And of course, the weekend is coming, and we will be back Monday. But have a great weekend. And of course, we always conclude by thanking the wonderful Go-Go Zoger, who is the producer of this podcast, Around the Political World with John Rothman. See you on Monday.